Hello, I'm Maloney Bhatt, and welcome to this fireside, part of the ET Boardroom Dialogues on Sustainability. Now, these are a series of conversations on the themes of strengthening water source sustainability and the circular economy, as well as accelerating the net zero transition and the achievement of carbon neutrality. This series is presented by Diageo. Now, as people become more and more aware of the effects of climate change, companies and other groups are starting to think about how to make their decisions more sustainable. This means they may need to change the way they do things just to be more environmentally friendly. However, making these changes is not always easy because there are so many different factors to consider, and that makes it very challenging for companies to reach their sustainability goals. So, today we want to talk about from ambition to action strategies for scaling up sustainable solutions and achieving carbon neutrality. And I'm very pleased to welcome my guest today, Anirban Mukherjee. He is the MD and partner and heads climate and sustainability practice in India at the global consulting firm, the Boston Consulting Group. He leads a team of climate and sustainability specialists in green business build, net zero and decarbonization, energy transition, ESG, and risk management. Anirban, what a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're looking forward to this conversation, Anirban. So, here's my first question. Lots of companies in India and all over the world are stepping up to do their part in combating climate change. And they're making big promises to take action to protect our planet. But, it's not always easy. And there are a lot of challenges that make it tough to actually put plans into practice. And companies they say they often run into issues with things like money, technology, rules, even organization that can make it very hard to make real progress towards cutting emissions. In India, reports suggest that six key industries like power, automotive, aviation, steel, cement, and agriculture are responsible for around 70% of the country's total emissions. Now, as someone with deep expertise in climate and sustainability practice, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how Indian companies are doing compared to their global counterparts, especially when it comes to taking real action and achieving carbon neutrality. And the second part of this is, what are some of the unique challenges that Indian companies are facing? Is it finding the right people, getting funding, accessing the right technology?
Thanks, Melanie. So let me talk about the global aspect of it first before I come down to what we are seeing in India. And at the very heart of it, it is important to first acknowledge that the carbon neutrality or the net zero journey is on the back of a transition that is taking place in the world, whether you call it energy transition, power transition, or ways of working transition. And that transition, unlike other transitions in the past, which have happened because of a new technology coming in or a more cost-efficient way of working coming in, this is for the sake of climate. So therefore, it is not a natural business decision that evolves organically. It's something that is being done in light of what we have to give back to the planet. And therefore, it is to a large part of it is the pace is being decided by how countries react, how countries are signaling, how the regulatory norms are shaping up, how the financing norms are shaping up. In that respect, at the highest level, we have seen Europe being at the forefront of it, whether it is on the back of their emission trading schemes or regulatory moves like CBAM, which have moved companies towards carbon neutrality at a much faster pace than the rest of the world. Second is possibly the US or even of late China, where again, the Inflation Reduction Act coming in, about $369 billion getting committed. That is exploding the domestic sector in terms of EV, in terms of green hydrogen, electrolyzer manufacturing, wind and solar, and so on. Now we come to the developing countries, and who obviously, like you said, the trade-off is much more stark for developing countries because we have to manage growth along with emission. There, I think it's a developing story, but there is an increased acknowledgement at a rapid pace. And I'll give you some figures here in India, for example. More than about close to 90% of companies are now disclosing their sustainability and climate action in the BRSR. About SBTi is one of the scientific target setters, and about less than 5 companies would set that target 5 years back. Now it is more than 125. So there is a large acknowledgement of moving towards that. And you can see it is on the back of government signaling, just like it has happened for the rest of the world. We have taken our NDCs, renewable sector targets, energy efficiency, energy intensity targets. We have the hydrogen mission. We have the SATAT scheme. And on the back of these are happening. So I think it's similar to what we have seen in the world. The government signaling, the regulatory signaling is picking pace. And following that is how we see companies also moving towards that. So that's how I feel the pace of India is happening. Your second question was about the challenges, right? The kind of challenges that different companies are facing. I would say the biggest challenge that we face is technology and scale. You have to make investments. Normally companies make investments with like to make investments in areas which are high degree of certainty. This instance for climate, companies are having to make bets in extreme uncertainty. It is technologically uncertainty, it is cost uncertainty, it is market uncertainty. And fundamentally, that's where the innovation comes in. How do you organize yourself to be able to place large, massive, futuristic bets with all the three axes being uncertain for the future?
Right. And how do you think companies are then doing? You're saying that, these are 90% companies are now reporting at least. But, what are these companies, or who are these companies? Are these the big conglomerates? Are these the mid-sized companies? What about, the number of small companies and, individual, one person-led businesses? How are these people faring? Because everyone will have to do their bit.
Yes, I think if we now break it down to say whether it is those 125 companies who are taking on targets or it's the one who are declaring their emissions, I would say that there is a graded tiering that is happening. At the first tier, right at the top, are the emitters who understand that their right to operate in an environment, in a world that will increasingly become low carbon, is a matter of existence. So you would see the energy companies who understand that oil and gas will taper out at some point, who understand that coal-fired plants will get transitioned at some point. So it's a question of survival. So you'd see the oil and gas companies, oil marketing companies, energy utility companies, them being at the forefront of this transition. We have seen announcements by Indian Oils, BPCL, HPCL, ONGC, all of them coming in. Similarly on the power and utility side. Second is the industries which are heavy emitters, like cement, and you talked about some of them: cement, steel, fertilizer. So those are the heavy emitters who are understanding. Within that also, those who have an exposure to the global markets. So if a steel company is exporting steel to Europe, then they would be at the forefront of reducing their product footprint, because that is going to now hit a regulatory hurdle when they try to export to Europe, which is going to increasingly put stronger emission norms for their imports. So that is the second grade of companies which are coming in. The third grade of companies which are coming in are those who are able to see an opportunity in them. So, for example, we will be seeing, climate tech is a massive space globally. We have close to, if I'm not wrong, close to 90 to 100 climate tech unicorns globally. About 20 of them in China. India has only one, right? So that space, we are seeing a lot of action where people are organizing themselves to capture this opportunity that is opening up. Is maybe the third wave that is happening. The fourth wave, to my mind, which is the most important one, are your individual entrepreneurs, your small and medium enterprises, MSMEs, SMEs, who I think is the toughest problem to crack, but the most important one, because they form the scope 3 of all the large companies. So that is a big unlock, which I think is expected to happen. And we can, talk about how to make that happen. But that, to my mind, is the fourth big unlock, which is yet to start coming in at scale in India.
All right, but let's talk about it. So how do we make it happen? I mean, and linked to this is the other question that I had is, how can Indian companies actually commercialize sustainability, tap the market, and win? What are the best practices that you think companies must adopt so that we can accelerate the transition to net zero? Especially because you very clearly pointed out that there is no one size fits all formula.
That's right, and that's why it's maybe difficult to give a few best practices, but let me give it a shot. So, one thing which we have seen globally happen, companies being able to capture these opportunities on the back of their own net zero. So, you would see large conglomerates in Europe, oil and gas majors in Europe, utility companies in the US, who have taken net zero targets. And the net zero targets necessarily mean they have to transition into elements like renewable energy efficiency, green hydrogen, energy storage, CCUS, and so on. And their scale gives them the right to be the first mover and then use that as a service provider for the rest of the industry. And that's the trend we feel we'll see in India as well. As large companies take their net zero targets, be it the conglomerates, multi-sector conglomerates, or energy majors, they will use some of their first mover advantage to get into these areas, which could be ammonia, hydrogen, electrolyzers, and so on. So that's one part. A second best practice which we see is financial innovation. This is a sector which will require a complete rethink on how you are financing. Let me give you an example. Whenever we see green financing, we talk about concessional debt. That is often not enough. You have to look at, when you're underwriting newish technology in a subscale market, you have to think of very creative tranches of capital coming in, which are somebody is giving you credit protection, somebody is offtake protection, somebody is giving you a first loss guarantee. And the good part is there is a lot of liquidity in the market. There is sovereign capital, there is concessional capital, philanthropic capital, which is ready to play that part. It is whether you can organize yourself to draw that financing in. So blended finance is possibly one big unlock. So financial innovation, how do you organize yourself to draw different tranches of capital? That's second. And in our mind, those who can make that happen quicker will win this battle. Third, I think, is not done enough, and it should get done, especially in India, is government partnerships. This sector, this space will always be regulation-led. This space will always be advocacy-led. The government is also taking a net zero target. It's so unlike a normal. We have never seen a corporate and government take similar targets. But here there is a net zero target for corporates and net zero target for government. So how do you collaborate? For example, in the G20 presidency, India is proposing the Circular Economy Industry Coalition. Now, how do you leverage that? Indian companies leverage that to build up their opportunity set in the circular. So the government partnership is one big unlock. Fourth part, which we just spoke about, is your suppliers. If we are able to move, and we have seen some of the global examples. Southeast Asia, we have seen the Mekong partnership, where 10, 15 of large FMCG companies came together to bring their suppliers on board and create products for their net zero. So how do you collaborate either within a sector or with your suppliers? So that is I think a fourth important part to my mind, which could be best practice that companies feel as they go out to capital. That is a massive scale, and there is inability of individual entrepreneurs to organize themselves for net zero. How can large companies play that part and capture that part of the opportunities? Maybe the fourth one.
Okay, yeah. These are some of the drivers that you feel, could be the ones that would actually help us when it comes to transition to net zero, especially for corporates, and how they actually leverage upon all of these responsibilities or all of these opportunities. But there are a lot of different people and groups who play a part in the world of sustainability, right? Like we have investors, you have the company leadership, regular employees, folks from civil society, and there are also experts who rate companies on how well they're doing when it comes to things like the environment, social justice, good governance. But experts in the sustainability ecosystem, and whom we've spoken to, have often pointed out that there is really not a very clear agreement among everyone about what all of this means. How do we measure it, or how do we even use all the information that is out there? So, from your vantage, what is the best way to create a single, reliable source of information about all of this to help people trust the data they are seeing, and for companies to do the right thing that are sustainable and then also make money?
Yes, I think the part about data and what really is green is one of the biggest challenges, and especially in some of the data dark sectors, that we see, and even countries or regions where data is not easily available, that comes in a way of a lot of the financing that needs to get drawn into it. As a financier who's trying to invest in greenwashing is a big fear.
Yeah.
So how do you overcome that is through structures. And as BCG, we had done a study, and there's an interesting insight that came out is the different rating agencies, and they rate in terms of ESG performance and climate and sustainability performance. There is as low as a 40% correlation between how different rating agencies rate the same companies, as against a financial rating, which has a 99% correlation. So there's a big gap between our understanding and interpretation of the data and maybe that's the journey from 40 to 99% is the journey that we'll have to cover. I think an immediate answer to how do we organize ourselves better. Number one is, I think these are steps we'll have to take. Like, to be a little technical, scope 1 and scope 2, there is a high degree of clarity in what accounts for scope 1, what accounts for scope 2 of a company. Scope 1 is what you're emitting from your own facilities. Scope 2 is from purchased energy. And so measure. I think there should be a high degree of bar in measuring and reporting your scope 1 and scope 2 is number one. Scope 3 becomes a lot more complicated because that's your upstream and downstream emissions from that. There we feel that there are two things. One is the Indian, we have to eventually develop our own taxonomy. Every region develops its own taxonomy. EU taxonomy is possibly the most advanced and complex. Right. India would have to develop its own taxonomy, where again the RBI is sending out discussion papers, and that work is happening over there. So and BRSR, although it's a lot more broad, but it's a good first step. So start aligning yourself to some of the global norms like TCFD. Second is, I feel this is one area where reporting frameworks exist. There is CDP, there is GRI, there's DJSI. And as companies think about their sustainability journey, beyond measuring, I think it's good to start aligning to some of these global frameworks with a high degree of commitment towards one or two of these global frameworks. And these are all good spotlights to drive into a direction as we move the journey. So maybe not an immediate answer of how can we get 40 to 99%, but there are some close-term, near-term actions that companies can take to move towards that direction.
No, but also in terms of the time frame that you speak of, from 1999, what is the time frame that you envisage?
This is a complete crystal ball gazing. But this is one of those things where we feel that the world is moving in a certain direction. The direction will keep getting accelerated, and the same waves that we talked about: Europe moving first, US moving second, China, and then India and the emerging country coming in with a few years of lag. That's going to happen. Like I said, EU taxonomy is already quite detailed, quite well fleshed out. US has already followed that after the IRA, especially. That wave is going to come. So anywhere between now and, I would say, in two waves. One is as some of the regulatory measures like cross-border adjustment mechanism in the Europe starts kicking in. It's already kicked in. The financial implications will start coming out from 2026. That's one massive move. Just to give a implication of that is everybody who's exporting to Europe will have to start releasing their product level emission. So that means you will have to organize yourself with a high degree of credibility in measuring and reporting your product level emissions. So that as near as 2 to 3 years time, we see that happening, at least for the sectors which have a global exposure. From there, following through and making it at scale for at least large companies in India will happen very quickly, because by then the norms are already set. Some of the tools have come into existence. So I think in the next 5 years, I would say most large corporations would have traversed the journey in having a high degree of accuracy in measuring and reporting their emissions, including large part of scope 3. The bottom layer that we talked about, which is smaller companies, SMEs, MSMEs, there we feel it might take a little bit more time to get to the same level. But anywhere between now and 2030, I think we should expect significant amount of changes and alignment to one or more of global standards coming in India as well.
All right. So 2030 is a number that I'm getting from you, but linked to that, I want to speak now on the larger issue of India's green goals. During the COP26 summit, the PM, Narendra Modi, he announced a plan to address climate change. And the plan includes the five main goals, as you'll be well aware of, to reach 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy by 2030, get 50% of the country's energy from renewable sources by 2030, reduce carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, lower country's carbon intensity by less than 45% by 2030, and to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070. Now, what do you think of these ambitious goals? And is there a plan, or would you suggest a couple of ways in which India can move forward in terms of a blueprint?
Yeah, I think before I dive into that, I think the one word we have heard a lot is the energy trilemma, right? It's the accessibility, the affordability, this energy security, and these are important aspects for India. And now there is a fourth, and now it's become a quadrilemma, if you may, where you've come in the sustainability of your energy sources. So I think we will move towards a direction in which affordability, accessibility, and security will remain top. And this transition is an opportunity for India, which is a net importer, heavy importer of our energy sources, to turn the story around. So it's not just about how do we meet our NDCs or how do we meet our net zero. Can we use this to also become self-sufficient in energy, to improve our overall energy security portfolio of sources? So I think that's the direction which really needs a discussion. Whether we will meet our NDCs, there is a high degree of confidence we will. We are already 175 gigawatt in renewable. We are adding close to 16 to 20 gigawatt every year, which is accelerating and reaching 500 gigawatts. I think we will get there. Now, once that part of your generation capacity starts to come in, what will follow is investment onto the grid and transmission. So that comes in. When that starts to come in, you start getting more electrification into your different sectors. Your grid starts getting more greener. Your company intensity, industry intensity also starts reducing. So piggybacking on that, the energy intensity targets should also come through. One part of the NDCs is also reducing commitment to reduce our overall, as a country, about by 1 gigaton that we want to reduce our overall emissions. A large part of that is your land use. To give some numbers, India is about 24% of our land mass is forest cover. And we want to go exceed 30, go up to 30 to 33%. That's one area possibly we might want to act faster. But again, there is enough and more opportunity there for us to meet there. So I will not, maybe on the NDC side, one part is the NDCs that as they stand today. Second, and that, like I said, maybe we should be on track to meet most of them. Second part is these NDCs or our national targets could also continuously evolve with every COP, and as the global warming targets keep getting more and more stringent, we might have to start moving towards a more 1.5 or 2 degrees as well. So that is the change part of it that will happen. But the third part, which I feel is a more important one to think about, is that while we do this transition, how do we create the manufacturing capacity in India rather than buying energy? So some of those moves that you're seeing in terms of incentives for domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers, incentives for domestic manufacturing of modules, of which will feed into the solar utilities. Those, I think, would be very interesting to watch closely. That how do we use this opportunity to also increase our security and accessibility for our energy going forward, and that I think as a country is a huge opportunity for us.
Yeah, huge opportunity, and hopefully that is something that a lot of companies also can leverage. This is now my last question to you. In a future with more renewable energy, how can we make sure that economic growth benefits all people equally, regardless of income level, especially because we are such an unequal country when it comes to and we have great income disparities.
I think there is one thing we have not spoken about, because a lot of the discussion that we have had is on the mitigation side. there is an element about adaptation and resilience, right? So as you talk about the broader society, there are two important pillars that we should think about. One is, while we will do all we can to reduce our emission and hand in hand with the rest of the world, the climate change will continue to happen.
Yes.
There will be global warming. There will be impact on weather. There will be impact on agricultural yield. There will be more droughts and more floods. Unfortunate as it is, there is no looking away from it. So one part is, how do we say, and especially a country like India, where we have significant amount of people whose livelihood depends on this, whose income levels will be severely affected by climate change. So one part of it, how do you look at adaptation and resilience to make it genuinely safeguard our farm income, to genuinely safeguard the lesser income tranches of the population, and so on. That's one. The second part is what globally is called just transition. And we are seeing more and more investment go into the just part of the transition, that it has to be just for all. That as we look at a transition, let's say we move from coal to renewable, what happens to the coal miners? What happens to those who work in the thermal power plants, right? And it is because where a coal plant is located, the solar plant may not be located at the same place. It's not a one-to-one replacement. So we have seen South Africa, we have seen Indonesia, where just transition has become a big topic, and there is a lot of global funds which are coming in to support that part of the transition. So that we, again, as we move towards this journey, it will be important as a country to also think about the just part of the transition, and how do we leverage the global ecosystem, the global financing pool, to bring in, so that as a developing country, we take the community and the population along to be an integral part of this transition, and not be something that got left out.
Anirban, thank you very much for speaking with us today and for sharing your thoughts on this very important topic. And, as you said, adaptation, resilience, and just transition is very, very important when it comes to climate mitigation, because we're all in it together, and it's important for be it civil society, be it corporates, be it government, to not work in silos, but actually collaborate so that we can make sure that the transition is just for everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us today on Economic Times.
Thank you. It was a pleasure interacting with you, Miloni. Thank you so much for having me.